こんにちは、ムディターのさくらです。芸術が人をつなげるをテーマに行っているオンラインゲスト企画。今回のゲストはアメリカのロリンズ大学で文学を副専攻し、イギリスでの留学経験も持つアレックス・ジェファーズさんです。芸術がシンパシーを生み出すというムディターの大切な概念に大きく影響を与えたアレックス。彼女の文学との出会い、そして彼女の人生の中で文学がどのような役割を持つのか、そして他者とのつながりにどのような影響を与えたのかにご注目ください。
Hello, this is our guest speaker today, Alex Jeffirs, who was going to be one of our guest artists for our workshop this summer, which unfortunately postponed until next summer. Thank you so much for taking your time for this Mudita's interview. First of all, can you give us some background and briefly introduce yourself, please?
So I'm a student at Rollins College. I am expected to graduate this May. I study mostly music, but my minor is in English. And right before I came to college, I studied for 1 year in England with a big focus on English literature. And that stayed with me throughout my life as I continue my studies in music.
How did you grow your passion with books and literature?
I'd say my senior year of high school, I had one particular teacher who just managed to drive home her own enthusiasm for it. It was just the sincere fascination, expertise that really began to draw me in. I was kind of a weak student in the language arts before that time happened, and then I just started to love it, and my interest and my achievement just expanded once I found that passion for it.
Okay. Now, what was that high school teacher like?
Oh wow, she had the best hats. She would come into class with just crazy new hats, different outfits. But what really came through was the sincere love of the art, and that really spoke to me. And it was extremely rigorous, but as she'd give lectures on the books through our class discussions, she just really started to touch on really profound abstract themes that I'd never thought about before in books. It was much less about, historical accuracy or, literary devices, and it really started to expand into what it really meant as human beings to be reading this. And growing up for many years, we had to memorize what's a metaphor, what's alliteration, and that's kind of where we tend to stop a lot of times. And then we don't really see what those are being used for and what the author is trying to express with those ingenious devices.
Yeah. Do you have any specific moments where you felt like, oh my, I'm so glad that I started reading a book. I'm so glad that I love reading.
It was definitely in the following year when I was doing my study in England. I went to a school called Christ Hospital after I was granted the ESU scholarship for 1 year. But then when I went there and I was the only one in this new school, I really had no words to express what I was going through. Not that it was bad, it was a really exciting and transformative experience, but there was just no way to understand or express this change that I was going through. And I was really fortunate to have the interest in reading, which I just really dove into. And I went through so many books that year and just began to really explore, and I really started to understand and relate to characters and authors when I was looking for answers for my own experience.
Now, what is your favorite novel? And why is it your favorite?
My favorite novel is by the author Toni Morrison called Beloved. I read this once in my senior year, and then I studied it again in England. And during that time when I was maturing, I was just fascinated by my changing relationship with this book. Now, it's a pretty dark text. It's about former slaves in America and working through the trauma. And when you get to the climax of the book, it breaks out of the prose and turns into this very poetic chapter. And it shows just how pain and trauma so deep can no longer be expressed in flowing prose, and thoughts become broken, and you really just start to grasp the depth of human emotion in the most extreme circumstances through that book. And because I was going through changes at that time, I started to realize the maturity and emotion coming out of that book.
I experienced the same thing where I did a study abroad. I went to a totally different environment from Tokyo to this small town in Nebraska. And in some sense, like, I feel like I was so vulnerable. There is nothing that I will be able to do by myself because I didn't know everything. When human became that kind of state, it's easier to observe a new perspective, a new way of living. And then it's interesting that, after you move to a certain place where you don't know anybody, and then things kind of start clicking from the literature.
Yeah, and I have a question for you. After going through that experience, did it change how you relate to art and change how you relate to people?
I definitely think so. Yeah, that's where I really started looking for, to do something like this. That's where I realized, oh my goodness, I have to come back to the States to study music. So yes, everything really changed from that point. Yeah. What can literature offer and provoke to human life?
When I was looking for answers for the experiences I was going through, I think it gave me this reassurance in its own special way of, this is what it means to be a human, what you're experiencing, the joy, the sadness. From there, it changed how I related to others and people who had experiences that I couldn't quite relate to. I began to try a lot harder to listen compassionately to others and to try to understand how other people were being impacted by their own experiences. And I tried harder to see life from other people's perspectives.
That reminded me concept of Mudita. It's actually coming from her idea. The art can bring the sympathy. I remember you told me the story, when you were taking English class a couple of years ago, when the professor said something about this relationship between the literature or reading the novels and human life. Can you explain a little bit about that? Where the idea of sympathy came from?
Yeah, in one of my classes at Rollins, one of the professors just kind of said, I think reading books is probably the best way to learn empathy. And we're like, that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. But when you do think about it, the only way to get through a book is to be quiet and kind of listen with your eyes. You can't fight it, you can't respond to it. You just have to accept what's going through the pages till you get to the end.
Yeah.
So you have to be a really good listener, and that's the only way you can enjoy the book.
Yeah, and then that really stuck in me. Once we received something through arts, reading a book, listening to music, or observing this artwork, we really cannot really say anything, right? We just have to kind of observe and listen, and then we feel the connections between the character and me, or author and me, or composer and me, and the player and me. And that's really, that's the huge inspiration for me to do this kind of Mudita's activities where art really can be a bridge between human interactions and human connections. So how do you see your life without books?
It's tough to imagine, but I guess before I was interested in books, I just had a really limited perspective. I'm trying to think back when I guess I was more or less a kid. I could only really think about what was happening to me and what mattered to me in each moment. I guess I found a lot less peace in life because I just really wasn't aware of what life was like for other people, and I wasn't really relating to people around me, let alone the rest of the world. I wasn't really participating in the world the same way that I am now. So without books, I guess I would be a lot more isolated. Yeah, just secluded, unaware, a little bit more apathetic.
Yeah. What was the transformation like, being isolated before you were introduced to books, and you were exposed to this world with books and with lots of human connection.
I think my emotional world just completely enriched itself, became much more intense. I began to respond a lot more immediately to other people's emotions and care a little bit less about my own. Care about them, but be a little bit more at peace with them. My own, I guess, personal life events began to feel a little bit smaller, and I started to care more about the bigger picture of life.
So Mudita, is this non-profit organization that we want to promote the importance of art education in Japan. We want to increase and provide the opportunities for young Japanese people to experience art and see this truth, the transformation. In your opinion, why is art education so important to young people today?
I mean, I think if we could imagine ourselves maybe 1,000 years into the future, when we look back on civilizations of the past, we look at their art, we look at what music they might have written, what kind of design their clothes had. We look at those impressions and pictures and we look to those to give us what those people were like. And I think we should really invest in the art, because it says much more than just the beauty. It's a representation of who we are. And those are the questions we should be asking ourselves now. Who are we as a collective group? What are our values? And how do we as individuals see ourselves in this bigger picture?
Yeah. What is your ideal art education for the future?
Well, I guess there's no uniform way, because that's the nature of art, but what it needs to have definitely is authenticity and vulnerability. And who knows what shape that's going to take in any given situation.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time to this great interview.
And thank you for having me today.
Thank you.